Firebase Coral Bean Ho Province, South Vietnam, May 12, 1968. 247 AM Captain John Hartley of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division peered through his night vision scope toward the Australian position, 3 kilometers to the west. Something was wrong. Where? Bunkers should have broken the jungle line. There was nothing. Where defensive wire should have glinted in moonlight, there was only darkness. Where floodlights should have carved lethal corridors through the trees, the jungle pressed in close silence. Suffocating Jesus Christ, Hartley muttered to his radio man. Those crazy Aussies are going to get themselves wiped out. Hartley's own firebase represented the American ideal of base defense, the pinnacle of engineering and firepower. 3 belts of concertina wire stretched 50 meters outward, claymore mines every 5 meters, reinforced concrete bunkers with interlocking fields of fire, massive floodlights capable of turning night into day at the flip of a switch. Cleared. Perimeter 200 meters deep scorched earth, where nothing could hide it. Was a fortress impregnable? Or so he believed. The Australian Task Force base at Nui Dat, by American standards, was insanity. A hole in the jungle, no cleared fields, minimal. Wire almost invisible. What Hartley didn't know what most American commanders refused to accept was a brutal statistic. By May 1968, Australian bases were suffering 1/10 the perimeter attacks of comparable American installations, while U.S. firebases endured nightly probes and periodic large-scale assaults. Australian soldiers slept through the dark, and when the Viet Cong did attempt to attack Australian positions, they died in disproportionate numbers, often without ever reaching. The wire the defenses weren't missing. They were simply somewhere else when the first Australian advisors arrived in South Vietnam in 1962. American commanders welcomed them with polite condescension. Australia was a junior partner, a middle power. With a small force, what could they teach the arsenal of democracy? Colonel Samuel Wilson, a senior U.S. advisor, wrote in a 1963 memo, "The Australians are keen, but working with limited resources. Their unconventional approach to base defense reflects capability constraints rather than tactical wisdom." That belief reflected a deeply rooted American military philosophy. Doctrine refined in World War II and Korea emphasized secure rear areas. Bases were sanctuaries, fortified zones where troops could rest, refit, and reorganize without threat. The logic was simple: more wire, more bunkers, more clearance, more safety. In 1965, General William Westmoreland made this doctrine official. His directive mandated multi-layer wire, 200-meter, cleared fields of fire illumination systems, and standardized bunker construction. 47 pages of specifications down to mine spacing and wall thickness. This was the American way of war. Systematize, standardize, fortify, build a castle, and dare the enemy to attack it. When Brigadier Oliver Jackson arrived in 1966 to command Australia's first task force, he read Westmoreland's directive and set it aside. Jackson had spent years fighting communist insurgents during the Malayan emergency. The jungle had taught him lessons no manual could. American officers who visited Nui Dat were horrified. Lieutenant Colonel George Patton III, grandson of the legendary general, filed a concerned inspection report. He strongly recommended relocating Australian units into U.S. bases for their own protection. One American battalion commander said bluntly, "They're either too poor or too naive to know how to defend themselves." They were wrong. The Australians weren't failing to build proper defenses. They were deliberately choosing not to. Sergeant Major Jack Pierce, a Malaya veteran, explained it to baffled American visitors. "You don't stop the enemy at the wire. You stop him before he ever gets close enough to see it." Australian approach was forged during 12 brutal years in Malaya, where early British attempts at fortress bases failed disastrously. Insurgents observed from the jungle, learned patrol routines, and struck when they chose. The breakthrough came when commanders like Lieutenant Colonel Walter Walker realized something radical. Jungle isn't the enemy. It's neutral. It favors whoever understands it better. Instead of clearing vegetation, they used it. Instead of fixed perimeters, they created zones of control areas saturated with patrols, ambushes, and listening posts. Walker summarized it perfectly. If you control the jungle 5 kilometers around your base, you don't need wire. If you don't control it, wire won't save you. Australia brought this doctrine to Vietnam. The contrast was shocking. Major Harry Smith recalled his first visit to an American base. Wire everywhere, lights blazing. Cleared ground to the horizon. I thought, bloody hell, you might as well paint a target on it. Nui Dat was the opposite. The jungle came within 50 meters of the perimeter. Minimal wire. No floodlights. Our wire is 5 kilometers out. Brigadier Jackson explained, and it's made of men, not steel. All American units conducted daytime sweeps and returned before dark. Australians lived in the jungle. They ambushed trails, studied patterns, recorded foot traffic, established silent killing zones along every approach. Captain Robert O'Neill described the difference. Americans defended bases reactively. We defended them proactively. Australian bunkers were camouflaged into terrain nearly invisible. Cleared American kill zones. By contrast, telegraphed defensive layouts to enemy spotters. Worst of all, Australians believed American illumination was suicidal. Lieutenant Dave Sabin put it simply, if you turn night into day, you also tell the enemy exactly where you are. So Australian bases stayed dark. By late 1966, American installations glowed like cities visible. From kilometers away, Nui Dat was a black hole. Firebase Gold. October 22, 1966, the Viet Cong 274th Regiment observed the American base for 3 days. The defenses never changed. Patrols followed predictable routes. Floodlights came on at the same time every night. At 2:15 a.m., the attack began. Within 7 minutes, VC sappers cut lanes through the wire. Mortar were suppressed. By 230, enemy troops were inside the perimeter. 18 Americans died. The base was contested for nearly 4 hours. That same week, VC scouts attempted to study Nui Dat. They failed. Recon teams vanished. No shots. No bodies recovered. Australian patrols were killing scouts silently deep in the jungle. Over 3 weeks, 23 enemy reconnaissance soldiers disappeared. Viet Cong officer reported, "We cannot plan an attack without reconnaissance. We cannot conduct reconnaissance without losing men." On December 8th, a reinforced VC company attempted a probe toward Nui Dat. They never reached the wire. Australian listening posts detected them at 2,800 meters. Artillery fell before the attackers realized they were seen. Retreating troops ran straight into pre-positioned ambushes. By dawn, 67 enemy dead lay in the jungle. Not a single Australian was wounded. They captured. VC soldiers said, "We attacked a fortress we could not see. Then the shells came from everywhere." During the Tet Offensive of 1968, nearly every major American base was attacked. Firebase Patricia suffered a 6-hour breach. 23 Americans died. Nui Dat. A few mortar rounds, nothing more. Later, a VC commander admitted, "We chose easier targets." Statistics confirmed it. American firebases averaged 14 perimeter attacks per year. Nui Dat experienced 2 probes, 0 breaches. By mid-1968, half of American combat power was tied down defending bases. Australians deployed nearly 80% of their troops offensively. As Brigadier Hughes explained, "The best defense is making the enemy afraid to enter your area at all." Captured. Documents later ordered VC units to avoid Australians entirely. They are unpredictable, too costly to fight. Operation Overlord 1969 Firebase. Anderson had a single strand of wire and a 40-meter clearance. It was never attacked. Why? Because jungle around it belonged to Australian patrols. By the time VC commanders realized this, it was too late. Major General MacDonald reflected years later, "We never built fortresses. Fortresses are targets. We chose to be everywhere." As dawn broke on, May 13, 1968. Captain Hartley surveyed his battered perimeter. 2 Americans were dead. Satchel charges had reached the wire. The Australians 3 kilometers away reported 0 contact. They had slept through the night. Hartley never knew that Australian patrols had killed 4 VC scouts hours earlier 2 kilometers from the base, ending the attack before it began. The lesson was simple and brutal. In jungle warfare, static defense is vulnerability. Wire and lights create the illusion of security. Real security comes from owning the dark. The Australians didn't remove their defenses. They moved them into the jungle, and no amount of concrete ever matched what disciplined soldiers' fieldcraft and patience achieved. They won not by fighting more, but by making the enemy afraid to fight at all.